So we are going to continue to explore the themes that were presented by Dr. Hayhoe in our first panel. The first panel will be on fractured narratives and emerging front lines. So I'm pleased to introduce the moderator for this discussion. It's our own climate associate and adjunct professor, Andrew Heffernan, and ask that he come to the front and be joined by the panelists. And I'm going to be reading out their names now. Marie-Ève Carignan, who's the professor from the Université de Sherbrooke and co-holder of the UNESCO-PREV chair. Phil Newell is communications co-chair, Climate Action Against Disinformation Coalition, who's been a key partner for us in the organization of this summit. Sonja Solomun is assistant professor and deputy director of the Center for Media, Technology and Democracy at McGill University. And Daniel Stockamer, also at the University of Ottawa, is a professor and Konrad Adenauer Research Chair in Imperial Democracy Studies, and has done a lot of work with us to understand conspiracy theories around climate change. So this session will examine how emerging narratives and the actors behind them influence what responses are seen as possible, urgent, or desirable, and what that means for building resilient climate communications and policies. And Andrew, we're in your good hands.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Thank you, everyone, for being here for our first full panel of the summit. Looking very forward to it. It's a beautiful day out. It's nice to be able to see some sun in this room. I'll try to keep my speaking to a minimum because we have 4 really interesting people on this panel to truly kick off the summit after Catherine Hayhoe's great keynote speech. So I've asked the panelists to do some very short introductory remarks. They've got a lot of really interesting things to say about these complex, difficult topics. But there will also be some time for some discussion after their short presentations to begin, and then we will also open the floor for the audience as well. And I will indicate when it's time to start raising your hand, and we can pass around some microphones for the Q&As. But with that, Marie-Ève, if you don't mind starting, that'd be great.
Thanks a lot. I will speak in French since I will represent the French part of Canada, but feel free to ask me questions in English. I will answer in English. There's really no problem about that. But yeah, what I will present today, it's the research that we are conducting with the UNESCO Chair on Prevention of Radicalization and Violent Extremism. So we have a program working specifically on climate disinformation because we see a link with sometimes other kind of misinformation, some kind of radicalization and polarization. That's why we thought it's really important to work on that topic with the UNESCO-PREV chair. Alors, notre recherche a 4 grands volets, principalement les recherches sur lesquelles on travaille en ce moment sur la désinformation climatique. Donc, on a conduit des analyses des réseaux sociaux numériques parce qu'on réalisait qu'il y avait vraiment peu de données, notamment pour savoir quels étaient les discours, justement, on parle de discours dans ce panel, mais quels discours circulaient au Québec sur les réseaux sociaux numériques en termes de désinformation climatique. On voulait aussi voir comment ces discours-là pénétraient dans la population. Alors, on fait des analyses populationnelles. On est en ce moment en train d'analyser les résultats d'un grand sondage sur l'adhésion de la population canadienne à la désinformation climatique. Je vais vous montrer rapidement, puisqu'on a peu de temps, mais pour ouvrir le débat, là, quelques données sur la désinformation climatique qu'on a pu observer. Ensuite, on a comme volonté de mettre en place des initiatives de dialogue pour voir comment des gens qui ont des visions totalement opposées sur la désinformation climatique peuvent peut-être trouver des points communs, puis est-ce que ça peut emmener tranquillement à s'ouvrir et à changer les points de vue. Et on travaille aussi sur les stratégies de communication relativement à la désinformation climatique, donc comment communiquer sans polariser, c'est une de nos recherches, ou comment communiquer des messages contradictoires en ce moment également, par exemple, parler de risque d'inondation, mais en même temps de période de sécheresse, comment ces messages contradictoires-là peuvent être transmis efficacement. Donc, c'était juste pour vous mettre un peu dans le contexte de sur quoi on travaille avec la chaire en ce moment sur la désinformation climatique. Donc, je vais rapidement vous montrer juste quelques résultats, peut-être pour partir la conversation. Mais donc, qu'est-ce qui a émergé un peu de notre première analyse là, des réseaux sociaux numériques au Québec? Donc, ce qu'on a fait d'abord, on a analysé les comptes des réseaux sociaux numériques là, de 76 comptes actifs au Québec. Ce qu'on voulait vraiment, c'était voir quel était le discours dans la province de Québec sur le changement climatique. Des comptes qui étaient assez publics, donc il y avait au moins 1000 abonnés qui étaient très partagés, pas des comptes privés de personnes anonymes finalement. Là-dessus, on a trouvé là, environ 171 publications qui traitaient du climat sur X, Facebook, Reddit, YouTube et Instagram en 2023. Et ce que vous pouvez voir, c'est que le discours qui prédomine vraiment largement là, dans les types de déni qu'on a classés, c'est vraiment le fait que les autorités politiques et scientifiques ne sont pas fiables. Donc, une grande méfiance envers les autorités qui vont parler du changement climatique. Et ça prévaut vraiment largement là, dans les discours qu'on peut analyser, bien avant le déni littéral du changement climatique ou les causes anthropiques, par exemple. On voit aussi que ce discours-là a tendance à être beaucoup plus mis de l'avant quand il y a des événements climatiques qui vont avoir lieu. Donc, par exemple, justement, on parlait tout à l'heure de l'augmentation des feux de forêt, des périodes où on voit vraiment plus de catastrophes naturelles, des grands rassemblements comme le GIEC ou les COP. À ce moment-là, on va voir vraiment une augmentation de ce type de discours-là sur les plateformes qu'on analyse. Enfin, on a vraiment vu aussi un lien entre, par exemple, le discours de désinformation autour de la COVID-19, de la pandémie de COVID-19, et puis du changement climatique. Les mêmes comptes qu'on observait pendant la COVID qui partageaient de la désinformation sur la pandémie et qui niaient l'efficacité, par exemple, du vaccin ou qui contestaient les mesures sanitaires, mais d'une façon plutôt axée sur une manipulation du gouvernement et non pas des questions qui peuvent être légitimes, étaient ceux aussi qui partageaient de la désinformation climatique. Et on voyait une hybridation des discours, c'est-à-dire que, par exemple, au lieu de parler de passeport sanitaire, on va parler de passeport climatique, on va parler d'un confinement climatique en faisant un lien notamment, par exemple, avec l'idée des villes 15 minutes, qui serait une stratégie du gouvernement pour nous enfermer, finalement, nous isoler, nous contrôler, donc brimer notre liberté, au lieu de voir ça comme une façon, finalement, là, d'être plus environnementale puis de minimiser les déplacements. On a analysé aussi des groupes spécifiques pro-pétrole sur ces plateformes de réseaux sociaux-là ou qui partageaient du contenu qui semblait de la désinformation climatique. Donc, différents groupes. J'ai mis ici là, de l'avant juste un des groupes à titre d'exemple pour vous montrer. Donc, on a analysé un groupe très populaire au Québec qui s'appelle Québec Fier. Et tout à l'heure, Catherine disait qu'on voyait vraiment différents groupes qui partageaient de la désinformation qui étaient financés par les grands lobbies du pétrole. Bien, c'est un bon exemple. Québec Fier est largement financé par des groupes albertains, notamment pétroliers. Et dans le discours qui prédomine, on voit vraiment un discours qui va contester les mesures à ce moment-là, comme quoi que les mesures pour contrer les changements climatiques sont inefficaces, et même un ton qui se durcit, qui va plutôt même parler de plus en plus d'une menace, que les mesures sont une menace pour notre économie, pour notre bien-être, pour notre identité de Canadiens ou de Québécois. Et ces menaces-là, qui sont souvent, ces publications-là sont illustrées par une tonne de mimes qu'on est en train d'analyser, une tonne de caricatures. Et on voit dans ces mimes et ces caricatures-là un discours qui est vraiment axé sur le gouvernement. Donc, c'est les pouvoirs publics qui vont être le plus visés. On va contester les mesures et on va attaquer beaucoup le gouvernement en place. Donc, ça rejoint un peu ce qu'on voyait dans les discours des leaders qu'on a analysés également, c'est-à-dire là, le fait qu'on conteste principalement l'autorité, la légitimité des élus politiques et scientifiques. Donc, c'était pour vous mettre en lumière un peu à quel point on voit vraiment qu'il y a une concentration du discours de désinformation au Québec en ligne sur la méfiance envers le politique, le scientifique, puis leur manque de légitimité. Parfois que, bon, derrière, il y a des intérêts qui sont plus ou moins clairs. Maintenant, je vais terminer là, juste mon intervention rapidement par quelques données que je vous présente. C'est la première fois qu'on les présente. On est en train de les analyser, donc ils sont toutes chaudes. On a fait en mai dernier un sondage pan-canadien auprès de 7000 personnes canadiennes représentant de la population avec la firme de sondage Léger Marketing et la chaire, pour voir quelle était l'adhésion de la population canadienne à différents de ces énoncés sur le changement climatique. Là, on a énormément de données, mais je vais vous en présenter 3 aujourd'hui là, avant de passer la parole aux collègues. Donc, on a regardé d'abord, est-ce que les gens étaient en accord avec le fait que le changement climatique n'a pas lieu? Là, l'énoncé complet, vous l'avez sur le côté. Ça va dire que le changement climatique n'a pas lieu. C'est une stratégie là, politique, notamment des scientifiques et des politiques. On voit que, bon, il y a plus d'hommes que de femmes qui vont être d'accord avec cet énoncé-là. Et que c'est un énoncé qui va aller chercher plus d'accords, notamment là, chez les moins de 65 ans, ce qui va un peu en accord avec d'autres analyses qu'on a fait où on voyait que les 65 ans et plus étaient ceux qui adhéraient le moins aussi, notamment à la désinformation puis aux thèses conspirationnistes dans d'autres études qu'on a fait. On voit aussi que le portrait est très différent d'une province à l'autre. Donc, quand on parle, on a exposé différentes mesures pour contrer les changements climatiques et on voit que le désaccord envers ces mesures-là est beaucoup plus grand dans les provinces, notamment de l'Alberta et de la Saskatchewan, ce qui confirme plusieurs autres études existantes qui montrent que les provinces qui ont peut-être davantage là, le revenu tiré de l'exploitation des ressources naturelles, notamment, sont moins en accord avec ces mesures-là. Mais au Québec, par exemple, on voit que c'est des mesures spécifiques comme celle, par exemple, d'implanter davantage de pistes cyclables qui peuvent être contraignantes sur la liberté des gens à se promener en voiture, qui sont moins acceptées. Et enfin, on voit vraiment aussi un lien avec l'opinion politique. Donc, on a demandé aux gens sur quelle échelle ils se situaient en termes de politique, donc plus à droite, plus à gauche, et on voit vraiment que les gens qui se situent sur le plus à droite de l'échiquier politique ont tendance aussi à être davantage en désaccord avec les mesures, mais aussi l'énoncé même de l'existence du changement climatique. Et on le voit notamment chez les jeunes hommes, là, c'est très clair le lien entre l'adhésion beaucoup plus à droite sur l'échiquier politique et puis la méfiance ou le fait de ne pas croire finalement les changements climatiques. Donc, je vais m'arrêter là pour qu'on ait le temps de discuter, mais je pense que ça met un peu la table sur ce qu'on fait, puis je serai enchantée d'en reparler tout à l'heure. Merci.
Yes, thank you so much for that, Marie-Ève. I think so many important points there. One of the things that I have often suggested in my research, I'm particularly interested in climate change. So when I'm thinking about information integrity, I suggest that if we can deal with climate change disinformation, we can probably deal with information integrity in other spaces. And I think the same goes true when we're talking about health or vaccines or any of the number of other areas that we see this. So I think this is really important information with a lot of great data attached to it. Thank you very much. And Phil.
Thanks for having me here today. I am Phil Newell, Communications Co-Chair of the Climate Action Against Disinformation Coalition. We're a network of over 90 groups around the world fighting this good fight. So I am very glad to see this room full of people here who I assume are not of the misbelief that climate change is a hoax. That doesn't mean, though, that you haven't been influenced by disinformation, just perhaps not the way you think. Now, the good Dr. Hayhoe just saved you from a pop quiz because she just gave you the answers to a couple of the questions I'm going to ask. But we'll see it through the presentation. It makes you underestimate the popular level of support more than it makes you think that it's a hoax. So, first, definitions. What am I talking about? Misinfo, disinfo, climate disinfo. Misinformation is being wrong. There is one objective reality that we all have to share. There are an infinite number of ways to be wrong about it, and apparently people like posting that online. Disinformation, I am a simple working man. It is wrong on purpose for money. That is my working definition. Pretty broad, pretty simple. Climate disinformation, then, wrong about climate change on purpose for money. That money part makes it commercial activity, which means it can be regulated. Pretty simple because I am a simple working man. Ask an academic and you will get something slightly more complicated. So, here are graphics from two studies on climate disinformation narratives, one using machine learning to break disinfo down into 5 narratives and dozens of sub and subclaims, reflecting those 5 big truths that Dr. Hayhoe just talked about. The other one being the discourses of delay, the way that they have attacked climate policy now that the climate science debate, quote unquote, is pretty much won. So, there are lots and lots of ways to be wrong about climate science, about climate politics, about climate policy, about climate activists. None of it is as succinct as my favorite academic peer-reviewed term for it, bullshit. It's all bullshit. So much bullshit. And where is it coming from? Kind of the wrong question. So I often hear disinformation described as though it is a naturally occurring phenomenon, a fog that rolls in on little cat feet, or an actor that's got an agency of its own, a mind of its own that is trying to do things. But it's not. It's lies, and lies don't spread themselves. They need people. So, oh, that was the pointer. Where is it coming from? The better question is, who is it coming from? And I think we all know the answer. It's people getting paid by the industry. One way or another, those who are fighting against climate action tend to be getting paid for it. Sometimes it's directly, sometimes it's indirectly. In the same way a government provides a subsidy for an activity it likes, deniers the fossil fuel industry, their enablers will provide a disinformation subsidy to get normal people online mad at climate scientists or climate policy. So here we have a map by Nicholas Graham of the University of British Columbia showing that ecosystem of the fossil fuel industry, its funders, the think tanks, individual funding recipients, lawyers, universities, all those other affiliates, very complicated. Here's a slightly more simple one, just of the Fraser Institute and its links to the Atlas Disinformation Network. And as you can see, again, it's very complicated. The bottom line being that industry and the rich create and spread disinfo as fertilizer to grow their grassroots, quote unquote, online groups into a thriving political opposition. But it's not organic grassroots, it's fed on corporate propaganda. It's industrial astroturf. So I could rattle off the names of the various groups there, all the little dots and things like that. But the web is so vast and interconnected, and there's so much money that doing so would make me look, well, oh God, it's happening already. Next slide. And of course, you are going to look crazy talking about a global conspiracy with normal people because, as we just heard, 80 to 89% of the global public wants more climate action from their leaders. In Canada, not much different. Over 70% want more wind and solar power, according to this report from the Reclimate team out of Carleton University. So if climate policy is so popular, why don't we have it all over? In part because the disinformation makes policymakers think that it's a losing cause. So when you're hearing people say, oh, we should pull back, we should weaken our demands, et cetera, they're not responding to a real demand. They're responding to the disinformation. And now social media is making it so much worse, as we just heard. Mainstream media lies are often kept at bay by fact-checking and other information integrity guardrails. Online, though, as the old cartoon goes, on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. And with some platforms, they don't care if you're dogs as long as you keep giving them money. Recently, the National Observer caught the cult-owned Epoch Times running some fake ads on Facebook. Broke Facebook's rules. Facebook said, oh, you can't do that. Gave them a slap on the wrist, said they couldn't do it anymore. Epoch Times just set up a new, different, bland brand name, spent $300,000 on new ads, and it was like, oh, okay, cool, no problem. Dogs in disguise. Facebook didn't care until somebody else pointed it out. That's the kind of dynamic that has let Russia infiltrate so many information environments, including those in the US in English language, where you would think it would be more difficult, but no, they just gave some podcasters $10 million and away they went. And you would think that would be like obvious that all of a sudden Russian propaganda is coming from Republicans, but no, nobody noticed until the Department of Justice indicted them, and then the useful idiots were like, oh, we had no idea we were working for Russians when we were Googling what time is it in Moscow to see if we would get an answer from our boss. Again, online, nobody knows you're a dog in disguise or a Russian propagandist. And that's bad, obviously, because social media isn't real, but it shapes how we interpret reality. In our research, our past deny, deceive, delay reports, CAD used to see a pretty stark difference between the far-right climate deniers, general conservatives, and the mainstream. In Canada, this is still somewhat the case. You can see here some network mapping from last year. All the communities kind of mixed in together. On the far right there, on the fringe, is that right-wing bubble. But in the US, through the billionaire-backed anti-woke, anti-environmental, and social governance campaign, they have essentially collapsed those distinctions so that, computationally speaking, climate deniers are now indistinguishable from those right-wing culture war influencers. And that's obviously, again, a huge problem because social media distorts how we think about the public and how we think about reality. One study calls it a funhouse mirror factory as it exposes us to disinfo we think is more popular than it really is. Because just a relative handful of people are posting this content. The Center for Countering Digital Hate once found just 10 publishers behind 69% of Facebook's climate denial. So, those few voices are amplified by these digital platforms, distorting our view of the public in the same way a funhouse mirror distorts our image of ourselves. Because again, climate policy is popular. Here's a graph from that 89% figure that Dr. Hayhoe mentioned. They asked people who would give 1% of their income to fight climate change, and 69% of the global public said, yes, I would give 1% of my monthly income to fight climate change. But when asked how many other people they thought would give 1%, everybody was like, oh, only like 40%. right? So we're in the majority of 50, 60, 70, 80%, but we think we're in the minority of just 30, 40, 50%, something like that. That's the real impact of disinformation. It makes us underestimate support for climate action. So what can we do about it? I like policies. Here in Canada, you have one that might actually apply. Well, it does. It's the Competition Act. It explicitly targets greenwashing now, and individuals can even make claims. So you can actually do things about disinformation. We don't just have to weather it, excuse the pun. It is something we can actually change directly. What else can Canada do? As we will hear more about lately, it is global warming, not national warming, which is why the CAD Coalition is working with the UN, UNESCO, Brazil, and other countries on a global initiative for information integrity on climate change, GIIICC. I'm going to start calling it GEECS. So what is GEEK besides a mouthful? It's the start of a new global community dedicated to prioritizing truth. You can think of it as a virtual clubhouse, though it's also got some very real objectives. Dismantle disinformation, create policies, put it on the international agenda so that people are actually creating solutions, and of course, fill the media with good information. Because again, even policymakers are not immune to disinfo. That 69% study, they also went to UN Environment Assembly and asked them how many of the public thought would give 1%, and they, even though they're trying to get climate policy, dramatically underestimated the support, thinking it was down at 37%, not 69%. So again, that's the impact of disinformation. It doesn't make us think climate change is a hoax. It makes us think doing something about it would be unpopular. But we're actually very popular. Disinfo doesn't make you think you're wrong. It makes you feel like you're alone. And the answer to that isn't just facts, it's community. So again, I'm Phil Newell for the Climate Action Against Disinfo Coalition. Thanks for being with me, or thanks for inviting me here as we build a more honest community. And remember, climate policy is popular, and if it wasn't, and the situation were hopeless, they wouldn't need to be spending all that money on disinformation.
Great. Thank you so much, Phil. It's always great to have Phil around because he can be so educational and informative on such a dark, oftentimes unpleasant subject, but also make us smile repeatedly throughout the presentation. So thank you very much, Phil. Up next, we've got Sonja Solomun.
So like Phil, I also like policy. So I work at the Center for Media, Tech and Democracy out of McGill. We look at predominantly how tech platforms impact democracy. So I work on digital tech policy, and that's how I approach these problems. So I wanted to share some findings from a recent study that we did on climate disinformation as part of our broader work on climate information integrity. And we really wanted to know two key things, right? What are the key narratives in Canada, and who are the key actors? And so I approach climate disinformation through this broader lens of climate obstruction, which is the intentional blocking or slowing of climate policy or collective action, because it really allows us to situate what is often seen as a very kind of new and exclusively technological problem of disinformation into this broader and longer history over the past at least 5 decades that has a very clear political aim, right? So as we've heard today, traditional climate denial has evolved to more nuanced forms of climate delay. So we wanted to test how prevalent some of these known narratives were in Canada. So what we did is we surveyed around, more than 2,000 Canadians, and we found that hypocrisy and elitism, so this idea that those pushing for climate change are hypocritical and elitist, hypocritical in their sort of daily consumption patterns, right? Like they're taking private jets, and so therefore their claims are illegitimate and should be thrown out. This was the most prominent narrative that resonated with Canadians. And this really capitalizes on the already declining trust in governments that we see. Also, more than half of our respondents agreed that Canadian oil is somehow more ethical than other oil produced in other countries, under the assumption that we have a better human rights footprint than, say, Saudi Arabia or Russia. Shane Gunster and other folks have done fantastic work on this, so I would point you there. And it really echoes how deeply ingrained this idea is into the very fabric of Canada's nationhood. And we also found that typical in other countries as well, this idea of absolutionism. So why should Canada have to do anything when other countries have an outsized impact? And we also saw that at the provincial level as well, right? So Alberta should do more than Ontario, say. So I'm cognizant of time. I won't go through all of them, but they're there for you to see. And we also found a pretty significant impact gap, right? So Canadians widely accepted that climate change is real, so around 80%, but less than half believed that they were directly impacted. So it's a bit like, smelling smoke in your house, but not checking for fire. And while the motivations of these denial and delay networks and narratives, while the claims and narratives may evolve over time and have evolved over time, the goal remains to block regulation and policy. So who are the actors shaping climate policy today in Canada? Our findings really echoed the established influence of key actors, including the fossil fuel industry, who have funded climate denial and lobbied against climate action for decades, as well as political actors and the alt-right media influencers as well. So outlets like Rebel News framing carbon taxes as, quote, a tax on working class Canadians. But we also identified, and this was crucial for us, tech platforms as key actors. So legacy actors in this debate still matter, but tech platforms are not just sites where disinformation happens, right? As Phil mentioned, this is not a passive problem. I won't rehearse some of the findings, but Meta's ad policies, TikTok's algorithm, YouTube's recommender engine, these shape what Canadians see and believe about things like carbon pricing more than parliamentary debate does in this country. So climate policy is increasingly being set by the tech industry. And this is an industry that is not transparent, that lacks accountability, that does not enforce its own rules, and denies access to journalists and researchers trying to study this problem. So Meta has ended its fact-checking program and blocked news in this entire country. The changes Musk has made to X, including the paid verification system, the changes to the algorithm, the dismantling of the entire content moderation team, these have all had fundamental changes to the information environment. And these things have contributed to massive decline in trust, the spread of hate speech, and the massive rise in climate disinformation. So in the first quarter of Musk taking over, we saw a 300% rise in climate disinformation, for instance. So we can think of disinformation as infrastructure. It's not just bad actors spreading falsehoods, it's an infrastructure in and of itself. It's an information environment where platforms decide what rises, what sinks, who gets heard. But it also shapes the conditions of possibility for climate policy itself. So climate disinformation has become, and I think needs to be responded to, as a structural barrier to democratic decision-making. And that's really at the core of my argument today, is that digital policy is climate policy. So we cannot mitigate the climate crisis without fixing our broken information ecosystem. We can't build lasting climate solutions on a broken foundation. And like we've heard today, we are not powerless. We've seen what works around the world, both in terms of public programs and regulation. So let's build. If anyone wants to collaborate or just has thoughts and insights, please do reach out. And I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
And thank you so much, Sonja. I like that positive note at the end. Let's build, indeed. I think that's why we're all here, trying to work towards solutions to these complex problems. I don't think there are any easy solutions out there, as the tech oligarchy tries to ruin our lives and our world, and they're doing so pretty well. But I do think that we are here because we do believe in that optimism, and we can certainly work towards those solutions, which we'll do over the next couple of days. So thanks again. And with that, Daniel Stockermer.
I look more on conspiracy theories, and one of the conspiracy theories I look at is climate change conspiracy. So very quickly, just to make sure we're all on the same page, what is a conspiracy theory? A conspiracy theory is a belief that two or more actors have coordinated in secret to achieve an outcome, and that their conspiracy is of public interest but not of public knowledge. And this goes back to, like, Douglas, one of the most famous scholars on conspiracy theories. And then one of a subset of conspiracy theories are so-called climate conspiracy theories, and then can range from like simple ideas that climate change is a hoax to more elaborated theories. And for the purpose here, I use a very simple one. I use climate change is the hoax, and scientists denying its existence are lying. So in the research, I'm looking at how prevalent is this theory, or in the context of other theories as well, and what are the determinants, or what are the factors that explain why people believe in climate conspiracy theories. And I did the study in 8 countries based on a survey. One of them was Canada. So in the survey I did was like 2 years ago, and the sample we draw is relatively proportional, relatively representative of the population. So there's explanatory variables because we also want to explain what are the determinants, what are the characteristics of individuals that make them more likely to believe. We look at age, gender, education, place of residency, immigrant status, socioeconomic status, political ideology, trust in scientists, and populist attitudes. I don't go in any of these factors in detail because of a lack of time. And here are some results. And we see that across the countries, and we see that about 15% in Canada, this is comparatively relatively low, agree with this statement that climate change is a hoax and scientists touting this experience are lying. As I said, in other countries like in the US or in non-Western countries, the numbers are a little higher. So Canada, alongside Germany, are the lowest numbers in our study. What we also find is, and this is important, because I mean, we have people who believe, people who disbelieve, but there's also quite some people who don't know. So we also need to consider these people who don't know. In our study, it's about 15–20%. So if you ask them, do you believe in it or you don't believe in it, like 15–20% say, I don't know. So what do we do with them? Do they follow like social desirability bias, that actually they believe but they don't want to admit it, or they just really don't know? Any of the two ways is problematic. And then here I have the a little bit what explains, and we see ideology, people to the right, that nicely aligns with what we've heard before. We see that people have populist attitudes, a very perceptible effect, and we also see that people have lower trust in science. These are so-called marginal effects, so they show like we can compare the effect across the different variables, and we see that young people are more likely to believe, which is also very concerning. But this reflects, and this is important, what I want to say at the end, we should not see climate change conspiracy theories as something separate. We see the same type of people believe that COVID doesn't exist, or believe that the election in the US was stolen, or believe that, Trudeau was collaborating with Albertan elite. So we really see, and we enable this conspiracy mentality. So we really see that climate change is not like something by itself. It's part of a broader phenomenon. So if we want to fight climate misinformation, climate change conspiracies, we also need to see this in the broader picture of other conspiracies, because the same type of people believe in different types of conspiracy theories. It's really, especially within countries, it's really very, very much homogeneous. And from research, we label this a conspiracy mentality. That means if you believe in one, you have a higher likelihood to also believe in another. So here, I think I summarized the results. So like a discussion, I think I can just stop here. And yeah, of course, I'm also happy to yield any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Thank you, everyone, for sticking on time as well. That gives us lots of opportunity to listen to my questions and what I'm interested in, which I'll pull out of everyone, and then we'll have some time for questions from the floor as well. My first question was going to be on the degree to which, I mean, we are kind of here, we're here in Canada, and many of us are Canadian and thinking about this from the Canadian context, not everybody, of course, but my first question was kind of going to be about to what degree is this a global problem and to what degree can Canada be shielded off from the globe and global issues in relation to this? I think you've all pretty much answered that already, but I want to look to the next part of what that question would be and thinking about solutions. Obviously, this is a global challenge. Climate change is what I would consider the quintessential global challenge, and disinformation is very similar in that regard. But how can Canada go about dealing with this in what is becoming a fractured global environment? If we are indeed seeing the demise of the liberal international order, which we may or may not be, certainly we are seeing something not good going on out there. To what degree can Canada effectively deal with this kind of thing, or any other state for that matter, deal with this kind of thing with our own domestic policies? Or do they have to be in congruence with other regional, global actors to do anything effective about this? And if everyone can provide kind of a brief response to that, well, I know it's a very complex question, and we'll just go in the same order again. So Marie-Ève, if you want to start us off.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I think we have to work on different levels. So I think that the first one will be to think about how we could regulate the platforms. I think my colleague will talk a bit about that, but I think it's really important to think about how we should act and regulate the platforms right now. We should also think about another aspect that I point out in my result is the fact that a lot of the discourse that we were analyzing, and also that what was pointed out in the survey is the distrust in the political actor and the scientists. So I think we have to work on that also. And in a lot of other studies that we are conducting with the UNESCO-PREV chair, we see that in conspiracy theory, for example, it's really linked with the lack of trust in government and scientists. So I think we should work on different way to have that kind of social dialogue to establish that confidence. So we have to work on different initiatives to have like public speaking and different occasions where the public can talk about their concern. I think it's really important. And I said that we were working on social dialogue right now, and maybe it's a key. We will see in the next few months because we will lead that initiative, but we will work on, for example, we will try an initiative that is called entretien motivationnel, so motivational interviews, and it was used a lot in the vaccination to help people decide that they will get the vaccine, and it's conducted one by one, so it's done by people who have the training to do that kind of motivational interviews, and it's focused on being positive and involving the people making their own decision based on what they are doing well, and then bring them to reflect on why they are acting in a certain way. And we think it was really positive in terms of result in the vaccination field. We are working with one of the main specialists in motivational interview, Arnaud Gagnard in Quebec, and also Sylvain Delouvet in France. So we will try to conduct that kind of interview, but about climate change. And I think it will be really interesting. Maybe I will come back with the result another time, but I think that focusing on the good behavior and permettre aux personnes de elles-mêmes prendre action sur une base individuelle en leur faisant prendre conscience de leur bon comportement, puis de pourquoi elles devraient réfléchir à leur comportement. Donc, on pense que ça va vraiment bien fonctionner. Donc, on va continuer à travailler sur ces dialogues démocratiques, puis des façons de mettre les personnes en relation, puis de pouvoir dialoguer ensemble, puis sentir qu'ils ont une prise de pouvoir individuel, parce que parfois, c'est l'impression, on l'a dit tout à l'heure, de pas pouvoir changer les choses. Donc, les gens pensent qu'ils ne peuvent pas eux-mêmes changer les choses. Donc, de leur donner un pouvoir individuel d'action, puis une impression qu'ils peuvent changer les choses, je pense que c'est aussi un bon point de départ.
Thank you. I really like that. One of the things you mentioned a lot there was people, right? I think so much of what you're saying revolves around reconnecting individuals and real humans beyond the screen. A few of us were at Environment Climate Change Canada yesterday, and this is what we talked about a lot, right? I mean, what can governments do? They're often like the main point of distrust, so it's a little bit difficult for the government itself, but if we can increasingly have actual interaction between people, I think these are the kinds of things that we need, certainly. Phil?
Yeah, I'd double down on that. In so much as social media is that funhouse mirror factory, the way to shatter that is to get out into your community and talk to real people and your real neighbors and realize, oh no, it is just a tiny fraction of people who believe this nonsense. It just so happens they have all the money of the fossil fuel industry and the votes that buys. So in addition to the social media regulation, like those are bad products and bad products get regulated, do it. It is the sort of larger, hairier picture of money and politics and how money is used to Bigfoot all over democracy in essentially every democracy that doesn't have guardrails against it. So building up those sort of protections against media consolidation and against the corrupting influence of money in politics is the sort of bottom line we can all work for.
Yes, and I think that the economy of disinformation is so important to all this, right? One of the things that's coming up a lot is the profit motive, and I think we have to think about how we can break that economic incentive for disinformation that comes from so many angles. Obviously, the tech platforms themselves, but also fossil fuel actors and many in between as well. Thank you. Sonja?
So maybe I'll get a little more granular. Definitely, I'll echo that governments need to recognize climate disinformation as a threat to climate policy, as the IPCC has done. I think we need to adopt a universal definition that aligns with the UN's Information Integrity Initiative. What's the acronym? GIS? You're calling it GI? GI. Nice. I think we need to mandate transparency. So currently, none of the platforms disclose climate-specific transparency data. So things like disaggregated transparency reporting would require platforms to actually publish enforcement metrics, which would be really valuable. So things like content takedowns, monetization, and then we need to enable or embed accountability structures. So I really like what the Europeans have done. I think Canada could model a lot of our future online harms legislation around the accountability mechanisms that they've done, which are to require systemic risk assessments, independent audits as well. And there's growing calls to expand the European Union's Digital Services Act, the DSA, to expand the classification of systemic risk that they've used to include climate disinformation. So I think we could support that and embed that ourselves as well. Forcing platforms to open up data access to vetted researchers and journalists so we can actually study these problems and come up with public policies and community programs to address them. And then stand up and support a Canadian climate information integrity hub that can really actively monitor and respond to these threats in real time.
Yes, thank you for that. And I like this idea of increasing cooperation and all of us working together in a coordinated manner towards these kinds of things. Daniel?
Okay, so I'm going from a different angle. I would say education. I mean, if we compare just general political knowledge, if you compare, for example, what young people know today and what they knew 40 years ago, it has decreased tremendously. So for every generation of the last 2 or 3 generations, we see lower levels of political knowledge. And if people know the environment around them, they're not able to judge. So I would say it's very, very important. We teach people math, we teach them English, we teach them French, but we don't teach them politics enough. And our environment, not only with regards to climate, with regards to many things, becomes so and so complex, and people don't follow it or cannot really situate themselves. It also shows, I mean, how so many people don't know. I mean, we have sometimes, for conspiracy theories, 20%, 30%, in the middle category, we don't know. And I think so it's very important in the long run to increase education, to increase political education. Have civic classes mandatory. I mean, from, like, say, grade 10 to grade 12. Think about having university, some kind of civic classes for everyone mandatory. I mean, this is not automatic. The world has become super complex in the last 50 years, and people know less and less. So in order to tackle this, I think we need to think about education. We need to think about young people, but also continuous education. I mean, the world is so complex, and if we don't do anything, we need to, provide better educational resources, provide better education, ideally, somehow for everyone, and especially for the young ones, because the young ones are all the ones who are the most likely to believe in misinformation.
Thank you for that. I couldn't agree more. I actually took civics class in grade 10 and then basically switched into a social sciences stream from there, and then took 4 degrees in university, more or less, in political science. So yes, I think that we need more and more of that for sure. However, I'll suggest leading into the next question, each of you more or less talked specifically about government interventions, and I know that's kind of how I framed the question, and education is also something done by the government. But as I mentioned, we're kind of having this fracturing liberal international order. At the same time, I think most of us, especially in the West, have often thought of the state as a purveyor of security, provider of resources, a good actor. I'm not sure we can necessarily count on the state being that moving forward. I think in Canada, we're generally fairly well insulated from this kind of thing. We're usually a little bit behind the US, and maybe we're a few years behind what's going on in the UK. But things are going in kind of a dark direction for many states in general, and it's possible that we end up with maybe not a Trump-style government, but one that is a little bit less responsible in this kind of endeavor. So what can we do beyond the state to do these kinds of things? How can we encourage education? How can we encourage platform regulation? How can we push back against all of the ills that social media and disinformation is spreading online, thinking kind of beyond certainly the federal government, but maybe beyond government in general? And if we want to go maybe in reverse order, Daniel, did you want to go again?
Difficult question, but I think, the problem we have right now, we live in so-called echo chambers. So people consume the information from like-minded people. We see this on the social media, but we see this also more and more in society. So I think we need to reach out. We need to talk to people. When, for example, don't avoid when we have, like Thanksgiving is coming up soon. When there's a discussion about politics, don't avoid it. But talk about it. I think there's a very little. Across the aisle, basically. So I think this is something we can do, and all of us we can do I wouldn't call it educate. It's too strong, but really not to say, hey, he's crazy. It's not talk about him. So, but really engage the conversation but in a nice way, and also don't think, yeah, these people are stupid. That's also a little bit the world we are in. This doesn't help us. So it's really, we need to talk as a society. I think with Trump, it has brought the Canadian society a little closer together. I see it now when I pick up my son from childcare, or my daughter, that people talk politics. But this is a chance also to provide, to different fact from fiction, and to talk. Other people are as much open. It was maybe more in February, March, but they're still very open. They're interested. They want to know what's going on in politics. So talk politics. Reach out the aisle, and not have this as a taboo. No, in the dinner table, we know he's a crazy Trump supporter. We won't talk to him. That's not the right way, because this just supports these people. And so reach out, talking to people, and I think all of us everybody can do this.
I think that really builds on effectively something that Catherine Ajejo mentioned earlier, right? I think so often people like us in this room tend to think if we just keep shoveling more and more facts, they'll agree. But if we're having those conversations around the Thanksgiving table for us in Canada, it's coming up pretty soon, instead of kind of just shoveling facts at that Trump supporter, suggesting, well, you might think this, but this is actually accurate, right? And kind of going piecemeal with these things. I think that can be a more effective way to have these kinds of conversations, and not necessarily get everyone to agree with us, but as opposed to just kind of shoveling those political science facts on more and more that we know don't really work with certain groups of people. Sonja?
Yeah, so you mentioned our meeting with the ECCC yesterday. I don't know who brought it up, but we were reminded that the right has historically valued and believed in the efficacy of strategic communication, right? And the left has sort of believed that the truth is self-evident. And as Catherine reminded us, as you're reminding us right now, as we've all seen from all of our presentations today, the truth is not enough, nor is it self-evident. So what does a really well-coordinated, well-funded, strategic, national communications campaign look like in this country? You know, I think that would be a really powerful tool. I would echo the digital literacy. You know, we've seen things like pre-bunking work. I do think it's a partial solution because we need those structural enforcement mechanisms. But, you know, pre-bunking, some of the techniques that climate disinformation networks or denialists use, instead of sort of just playing whack-a-mole with the individual campaigns or narratives. So, you know, a common technique is cherry-picking data. So, you know, getting the public to understand how snippets of something that is true or feels authentic to the public is taken to manipulate the information for a particular political aim would be a really valuable lesson.
Yeah, so in addition to those sort of approaches, I think it's always important to consider where you're doing mass communications or interpersonal communications, because if you're talking to a family member over a dinner table, obviously you're going to want to be nicer. You're going to want to sort of gradually help them crawl out of the rabbit hole, maybe. If you're doing mass communications, you be mean to them. You can ridicule the ridiculous. And that's the sort of social pressure that they respond to, because I don't think it's controversial to say we shouldn't appease fascists. So, like, stand up to them. Be normal about it. We know those are the sort of social signals that they respond to, that oh, this is my community now and this community is normal. And if you say that community is fucking weird and you're sponsored by billionaires and I'm not going to talk to you anymore, that creates some pain in them. All of a sudden, they're not fun warriors for the truth. All of a sudden, somebody they kind of like is telling them they're weird and wrong, and like, that might hurt. And for a time, that can further radicalize them down the hole, but that's when you have to, you keep pulling them back and you keep having those conversations and you keep bringing them back as a person that they actually trust. But me as a person they don't trust, no, I don't have to be nice to you if you're wrong on purpose for money. I'm going to tell you that, and I'm going to make sure everybody else sees me telling you that, and that they laugh at you, because that's how you actually achieve social change, is through shame and peer pressure, because that's sort of the dark side of reaching people's heart that Dr. Hejo was talking about, was that they respond to those sort of social pressures, and seeing that it's okay to be a fascist is going to make it okay to be a fascist, and seeing that you will get yelled at and more, maybe that's a consequence. So create consequences for the liars and for those who enable them, however you can. In part just by getting offline and touching grass and going into your public community and going to your local town council meetings and just being relentlessly normal, because the other side is sending, 3 different conspiracy-addled wackos to yell at your local town meetings about how they don't want wind and solar. And so you and 12 of your normal buddies can go do that and just be normal. And that's sort of the solution.
Yeah, thank you very much. Marie-Ève, some thoughts on what we can do kind of beyond government?
Yeah, I will. I agree with what the colleague just said, but I will echo that a little bit. But two years ago, we write a book with one of my colleagues who is called in French "Mon frère est complotiste: Comment rétablir le lien et le dialogue social." In that book, we are talking about conspiracy theory, including the one related to climate change. And what we say that is really important to listening to the people, particularly one-on-one, and be available for the people when they need some help, because sometimes they feel alone. And that is part of why they tend to radicalize and believe in different conspiracy theories. And we have to validate their feelings, because sometimes it's not a matter of fact, it's a matter of feelings. So we have to understand how they are feeling and why they are feeling that way. And sometimes that's the answer. They don't need a lot of data to change their mind. They have to understand. And sometimes we have to understand why they are feeling that way. And when you look at conspiracy theory, you see really often linked to other difficulties. For example, isolation, marginalization, social difficulty, economic difficulty. So we have to work on that different social issues to to help people get feeling better and involved in the society, and then trust the government, trust the scientists. And for sure, education, it's a key factor, but it's in a global, different kind of initiative that we have to work on and focus on. And yeah, so I think that it's really important. We have to work on different inequality, and also, like I just said before, social dialogues. So the motivational interview, it's one, but we will also try to have that kind of democratic dialogue with our group. So put people who tend to have different political opinion on different view on different thing, and just put them together and make them talk. Sometimes it's the beginning of a less polarized opinion. So I think it's really important to work on dialogue also, yeah.
Great. Thank you all very much for those thoughts. Really appreciated. We've been talking already about kind of broad solutions, sort of from the top down, sort of from the bottom up. But I want to push us to get a little bit more specificity in here. I think, again, people like us in these rooms tend to talk about and agree on sort of the broad themes and approaches and things that we can do. But I'm wondering if everybody can give a very specific, concrete approach to a solution, whether it is a policy action, whether it is the formation of a coalition, whether it is something that the university is decreeing or something that a political science professor can do. Sort of one thing that is actually politically possible and feasible in this era that we're in, and concretely, what steps can the big we take to achieve whatever that concrete thing might be? Did we want to go reverse order again? Marie-Ève, if you want to start.
Yeah, but I would jump on what the colleague just said before, but I think that a communication campaign, a big organized communication campaign will be great to counter some kind of misinformation. So maybe that's one initiative that we could focus on, have like a more organized and strategic communication campaign. And that's why with our team, we are working on how communicate without polarizing and how we could communicate sometimes message that seems like really contradictory, but it's important to know how we could pass that kind of message without polarizing more the people that tends to don't trust that kind of message. So yeah.
Yeah, I really like that. And if I could follow up, again, something that we spoke a little bit about yesterday at ECCC and that we're thinking about a lot, if we're going to have this communication campaign, who should be the face of it, and what kind of platforms, outlets should we be using for this? If the disinformation's happening on Twitter, do we go on Twitter? Do we go everywhere? Is it kind of a whole of social media approach? Or what could this campaign actually look like, and who would be the face of it?
I don't think we should focus on X or Twitter, because that's kind of an echo chamber where I don't think it will be the good public. I think it will need to be more global. And yeah, I think we don't have to work on specific echo chamber. We have to work on vast majority of the population. So maybe that's part of an answer. I don't know. For the people that could be the face of this campaign, I really don't know. We have to think about it. I think maybe that's a good one. Yeah.
I'm not sure either. That's why I'm asking the question for kind of my own personal interest, but hopefully others are interested as well. Phil, any thoughts on this, on a specific intervention and kind of concrete steps we can pursue for realizing it?
Get off the bad social media sites and make fun of anybody who still uses them. Just social pressure. Social pressure works, and then go out in the real world. And when you're doing those communications, do them in the real world where people actually are, where people don't have ad blockers so they don't see all those ads anyway, or don't watch YouTube video, whatever it is. Reach people in the real world where they really are, and that's the more authentic connection, and it's not the constant barrage that they just sort of scroll through and passively accept, unless we're just fully doing propaganda at everyone, and then just get comfortable with repeating your political message over and over and over and over and over and over.
Quick follow-up / challenge. I mean, I think a lot of us in this room would agree. So if everyone in this room and everyone who agrees on kind of climate change and disinformation gets off those platforms, does that just create like a bigger echo chamber for the other side? Or would the idea be that they would...
MySpace? Do you still post to Dig? Like, no, social media companies should not be forever things. They should be ephemeral. They should be fads, and we should treat them like that. We shouldn't treat it like it's going to be value for the shareholders forever. They should be a sandbox where our interns play and do silly shit because it's the online, right? Like, treating it writ large like it's not important, like it's not the public square, because it's not. It's a private company run by a weirdo. That's the sort of approach that I think can then ripple out and have those kind of effects of like, oh, no, it's not cool to be on there. Like, remember when being online made you a nerd? Like, that was bad. Like, that's part of it, is getting back to some of that social stigma of like, no, it's weird to post things that are wrong all time, all day, every day. Like, that's weird behavior.
Calling him weird is very charitable, so thank you for that. Sonja, any thoughts on this?
I would encourage, like the academics and the researchers in the room to just make your research as publicly accessible as possible. There was a time where we sort of denigrated like an academic going on, doing more sort of public-facing things in a specific way. I think we're at a point where we really, really need to just reach as many audiences as possible with some of these amazing findings. And the other thing I would say is like kind of support implicit strategies, right? So if you're working on climate change disinformation, maybe support and piggyback on the growing movement for youth online safety. Youth in this country are starting to get off their phones. Schools are starting to ban phones. So, how can we encourage everyone to sort of get outside, enjoy their community, be off these systems while we build and wait for structural changes like regulation?
Yeah, thank you. Very practical, and for people in this room as well. And just before we get to Daniel, I'm really happy that we got a little extra of Catherine Hayhoe's time, which means we started this panel a little bit late. So I'm going to unilaterally decide that we're going to slightly eat into the morning break, which was already a half an hour, which I think is pretty charitable at that. So if people want to start putting up their hands, we can have somebody go around the room with a microphone, and we'll definitely have time for a few questions after Daniel's interventions here.
I don't have a concrete answer, but my answer would be fight populism.
Mm-hmm.
Because, this is all part of this broader populist movement. And if we don't get this under control, we call this the populist era or the populist century, I don't think they will go away. And again, I really think what's also important, but I highlighted in my talk, we should not see climate disinformation as a separate thing. This is part of a lot of other types of disinformation, and I think we can only fight climate disinformation effectively if we also address the other types of disinformation, because it's the same type of people who believe in different types of. They believe that the elections in the US were stolen in 2020. It has nothing to do, or they believe that COVID didn't exist or was spread by the pharmaceutical company, name them. So I think it's really important, one, to take home, not to take this as an isolated fight, but to bring this within the broader context, because that's the only way. And also to really demand from our politicians, no, populism, even if it can bring short-term gains, even let's say if I'm a conservative, if my conservative leader uses populist rhetoric, tell him, no, that's not the way to go. And I think that's very important. Hold our if on the left the same thing, or on anyone. It's not if you demonize others, if you take shortcuts, that's not the right way. But all of us to hold also the standards we hold for us, also hold our leaders accountable. I think that's very important.
Yeah, I think that's an extremely important point. We cannot effectively deal with the climate crisis if we cannot effectively deal with each other and have effective democracy. And as we are seeing a slight erosion to democracy, we are seeing an erosion to our ability to deal with the climate crisis. And unfortunately, these forces are kind of working in a vicious cycle. So we do have to think about them all in a more holistic picture. And sorry, just first, if you could just briefly introduce yourself, and we'll probably collect 2 or 3 or 4 questions at a time, and then have a round of answers after.
Okay. Bonjour, Jean-Patrick Toussaint à la Fondation Trottier. Thank you so much. This is really stimulating. I'm going to try to make sense of my own questions, but we talk a lot about regulating the big sector, which seems almost impossible because they've got so much means and power. Having one-on-one conversation, really going back to the communities. But and based on some experience that I've had in conversation with someone who seemed very much on a different spectrum than I am and trying to engage in a conversation, validating feelings, I'd like to hear you a little bit more about the increasing divide over the last 30, 40 years between the haves and have-nots. The power, the money seems to be concentrated in such a small portion of the population, and whereas the rest of the folks don't have that voice, that power, and therefore may turn into those echo chambers, may use those social platforms to validate what they're feeling, what they're hearing. So, how do we go around this, or what's your take on this issue? Because when you have a hard time making ends meet, when you're struggling within your own community, when you're facing environmental racism or whatnot, it might make it harder or easier to lean into those conspiracy theories or being prone to misinformation and disinformation. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions in the room at the moment? Maybe we'll take a question from online.
Sure. So Nicolas Chopin is asking, while research does show that on average people worldwide do support government action on climate change, there are analyses that show that we disagree on specific policy solutions to climate change, the carbon tax being a good example here in Canada. How do we build consensus on where to put our tax dollars?
And last call, anybody in the audience here want to pose a question? We've got one over here. Thank you very much. So we'll take this final question, and then we'll maybe go through a round of answers, and feel free to kind of give broad answers to the multiple questions, or pick one or two, and we'll go from Marie-Ève down to Daniel again.
My question is sort of also related to what JP was saying, which is kind of a direct question for Daniel. Which is that I'm not sure how I feel about this framing that populism itself is the problem, and what we need to do is tell the public that they need to have more trust in experts and institutions, because of the fact that what we're dealing with is not just a problem of disinformation. There's pre-existing problems related to distrust of elites as a result of this massive rise of inequality. And so what we also need to do is figure out how to validate those feelings that people have. And one of the ways to do that is to redirect their anger at the people that are actually responsible for the deprivation that people feel, which is a form of populism. It's just not right-wing populism.
Thank you very much for those questions. So we'll go through the group. I did say we'll start with Marie-Ève, but since that was a little bit more directed to you, Daniel, did you want to start off and kind of respond to that?
Okay, wow. These were really good questions. But I think what you say is absolutely true. I mean, if we look at a sequence, I mean, the world we are in could only happen because in the last 20 years, I mean, trust in government, trust in democracy has declined tremendously. And this allowed other forces to emerge. I mean, it's a chicken and egg problem. And so, I mean, of course, it's important. I mean, if you ask, I mean, think about, I mean, I'll give you an extreme example, the US. Like 10 years ago, or before Trump came into power the first time, approval ratings of Congress were 18%. 18%, it means more than more than 4 out of 5 people didn't trust. And we have similar, and that's what we see in a lot of Western countries. Where does it come from? You're right, it comes from that the gap between rich and poor increases. It comes from structural inequalities. It comes from, but also perceptual inequalities. And it comes from also that the world around us becomes more and more complex. I'll give you an example. I'm originally from Europe. My research focus is partly on Europe. But if you were to ask me, explain to me in 2 minutes how the European Union works, I cannot explain it. And this creates a feeling of uneasiness among people. And then somebody comes, I mean, what are conspiracy theories? Populism at the essence is we find easy answers for complex problems by pitting the world into good and bad. And the conspiracy theory is kind of the next step on this. But it is highly, so it is, of course, and it makes this task the more complicated. Of course, I mean, if we don't combat the original reasons, which is this deep dissatisfaction. But with this dissatisfaction, another problem is, I think a lot of politicians haven't understood that. I mean, I do a lot of, I meet a lot of politicians here, when politicians from Germany come and others, they haven't really gotten this. And I think so these are tremendous problems, but I mean, if we don't restore, at the end it's representative democracy. If we don't distrust in representative democracy, people want something else. And this something else can have more extreme forms, and this something else can also be then, I mean, the reality is no longer the reality. And so, and this is the danger we are in. And all the conspiracy narrative, the populist narrative feeds into this. But I think we are in a very difficult, I mean, I always say Canada is like 10 years behind the US. If we want to avoid what happened in the US, now is the time to act. I mean, the good thing is that Canadians see what happens in the US. But that's why, I mean, sorry, I'm drifting off, but I'm still saying, that's why I think personally for the Canadian fabric, social fabric was good that happened. Otherwise, it would have followed the same path as the US. And so there is some positive when we have to build on this by really showing, okay, do you want this? Do you want this? I mean, that basically censorship. Do you want this? I mean, you know, the right always, I mean, left and right is always bad to say, but I mean, they all, okay, the left cancel us out, but they're doing the same. Look what happened with the comedians or whatever. So I think this is a time to reach people. But I think at the end, there needs to be trust in science. There needs to be trust in, call it what the truth is, and we need to restore this. And then maybe last point to your question, yes, but it's also problematic. It's too easy to say, okay, those people that believe in conspiracy theories are the have-nots of society. They are spread equally. For example, in my study, education has no impact. Gender has very little impact. Urban-rural has very little impact. It has some, but very little. So they are spread everywhere. So it's too easy to say it's just the have-nots, or it's just a reflection of the inequalities we have. I mean, they are also spread among I mean, they're basically for everyone, and some a little more than for others. So this is also what we have to keep in mind. And there are also people that are part of the haves, and they have actually benefited from everything, or from the structural changes we had in the last 30 years. That's what we should also keep in mind. Sorry, it was a very long answer. Hopefully, yeah. No. Sorry, Andrew.
Thank you for that. We are running out of time, but Marie-Ève, did you want to give a brief response to one of the questions?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think inequality is part of. It's not just it is maybe the tip of the iceberg, because there's many other factors. For sure, there are some people who have a PhD and believe in conspiracy theory for different reasons. Sometimes it's psychological reason, it's a distrust, it's different kind of thing, but I think we have to work on different aspects of it. And one of it maybe is to educate the people about the democratic system, because what we tend to say right now, it's like a distrust in the democratic system, and that is really concerning. So when we talked about education, I think it's media education, it's science education, but it's also an education to the political system, because people who tend to believe in conspiracy theory and disinformation tend to be less politically active and vote. And we see in different studies, really recently, that the people, there's an increasing number of people who believe that a military system or an authoritarian system will be better than a democratic system. And it's really concerning. It's happening right now in Canada, in the US. People tend to believe that an authoritarian system will be better. So that is really concerning. And I think that demonstrates maybe a lack of political education, and that explaining maybe that rise of populism. And that rise of populism is also using inequalities and or a perceived feeling of inequality, but sometimes it's not really inequality, but it's like a fear of lost some of them privilege because of the immigration, because of different social issues. So I think we have to educate people about that kind of issues to increase the confidence in the system and in the democratic system also. Yeah, so maybe it's part of my answer. I have really many other points, but I will.
Can I just Real quick, on that sort of populist thing, We Make the Future has something they call the race-class narrative architecture, and it is essentially sort of the inoculation approach, but for the racism and bigotry, and it is essentially telling people that billionaires are using racism to exploit you and get you on their side and fighting each other instead of getting what we need from those who are hoarding it. So that race-class narrative architecture is pretty tried and true in the way to address that sort of populism and the way it's being exploited.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. And just closing words from Sonja. Any thoughts on any of the questions?
Yeah, I mean, the growing inequality divide question is a really important one. I remember a few years ago, there was a study that found, one of the most prominent disinformation networks was like a group of teens running a coordinated campaign out of Macedonia. And it turns out, like, for no political gain at all, just it turns out that spreading disinformation is like a really lucrative side job for college students. And I remember reading it and sort of empathizing. If you weren't aware of the political repercussions, I funded my way through several degrees. And that's why I think instead of looking at individual solutions, we really need to get at the structure. So the European Union has imposed enforcement fines of a certain percentage of the global market value of platforms operating there, which is a significant population. So I would just harp back to really needing structural solutions to this instead of individual ones.
Thank you all for those comprehensive answers, and everybody please join me in thanking the panelists here for a really rich first discussion of the day.
So thank you to the panel on fractured narratives and emerging front lines. We had a great discussion there about the importance, first of all, to understand the disinformation narratives that are distorting the public understanding of climate change and solutions. So we did talk about a series of those different delay narratives. Other things that came forward is the importance of digital policy and the understanding and working with or trying to counter the impact of the tech platforms in distorting the information that becomes available to the public. There's a good discussion around trust and transparency being underlying issues that affect the effectiveness of disinformation campaigns. And then, fundamentally, the mitigation of these narratives comes to astute strategic communications. And it was an interesting discussion there about different approaches of how do you counter people with hardened views. And again, bringing forward that distinction between disinformation is not about stifling opinions. We want to celebrate different opinions, but making sure that the underlying fact basis is one that we are all working from. I know these are themes that we will continue to explore as we go forward. And I would like to challenge the participants as well that this works best if it's an open, structured conversation. And so don't feel shy about bringing forward your questions and comments.